Hey everyone, welcome back to the weekend edition of this show, and thank you so much for coming in to watch this. We're going to talk about a couple of things here on today's episode. So one of the things we're going to take a look at is obviously how the miners did this week. How they did yesterday was a pretty bad week, obviously. It looks like it was more or less of a buy the rumor event, sell the news event on Bitcoin spot ETFs. We'll look at that. We'll also take a look at the previous cycle, how the miners reacted back then, a year prior, a year after, and then currently this cycle, how we're looking at, and we'll discuss it. I'll give you guys my perspective on it all. And then we'll also take a look at the weekly performance here for the miners for the past week against Bitcoin. And then we'll also take a look at the hash rate and BTC growth over the last 12 months on all the miners. So we do have quite a bit to get through here. And as always, you guys know the drill here. Not financial advice, for entertainment only. Please do your own research and invest in the following coins and companies for full disclosure. And if you enjoy this type of content, hit the like button, subscribe. Helps me out tremendously. And let's take a look at what's going on here with Bitcoin here really quick. So if we go back to this screen here, we can see the chart here. This is basically a 1 year time frame on Bitcoin. We know that the halving event is happening here in possibly April sometime. We don't know exactly what date, but somewhere in the middle of April is what we're guessing at. On this chart, we're going basically back to, well, January of last year. And we've seen a huge rise, obviously, in Bitcoin here, going all the way from the bottom that it was at in January 18th here. And what was it at that point? It was a low of 20, it closed at 20,674. So we're up 100% plus on it over the year. And obviously, the halving cycle is still a couple months away. So if we really look at it from April, sometime in the middle here, Bitcoin price at that point was around 28,000. So still pretty close to about a 100% increase in the price. A little bit less, probably closer to 85, 80% on that from a year out from the halving cycle, okay? Bitcoin obviously was way down on Friday. It was down 7.7% on the day. It closed at 42,773. The miners, oh my gosh, they got clobbered, it seems like. So, like I said, it looks to me like this might be a buy the rumors, sell the news event here with the spot Bitcoin ETF. We're not seeing anything positive happening other than selling pressure on Bitcoin. So, and the miners themselves. That's why I'm thinking it's more or less sell the news event happening for us, which is okay. One, it's a good thing because one, we get to dollar cost average in if you are doing that. Obviously, if you're trading it and you bought it at a higher price, yeah, it's not so good, right? So you may want to consider dollar cost averaging in a little bit more before we go back up on this, but we may still continue to go down a little bit more. And the reason for that is with the CME Bitcoin futures, we do have this gap here on the chart. You can see it right there. And that's between 39,200 and roughly 40,500. So we may come down to that, test that before we start going back up. When that's going to happen, I don't know. Even if it happens, I'm not sure, but we do have that gap, and usually the gaps get filled. Excuse me. So looking at that, we may come down at some more, which is fine. But in that case, you obviously want to be prepared for it and have some cash on the sidelines to dollar cost average in, which is what I've been doing here. So on Friday, yesterday, I actually did buy 400 more shares of Bitfarms at like $2 and, gosh, I'm going off of memory here, $2.43 or $2.36. Can't remember now. One of those two, but right around that range there. And then I also bought a little bit of Iris Energy as well, which was just the remainder of what I put in. I basically put in $1,000 into the account to buy. So majority of it was in Bitfarms, and then the rest I put into Iris Energy, which was like only 18 shares. Not a heck of a lot. Wish I could throw in a heck of a lot more, but you know, we do what we can do with, and that's all I could do with. So maybe if Iris goes down a little bit more, I'll buy into that. CleanSpark also, if it comes down a little bit more, I'll maybe get into that one next week, but we'll see on those. So as far as the miners are concerned, right, Bitcoin was down 7%. The miners did pretty much that or double that for most part. Any was down 19%. Argo was down 19%. Bit Digital was down only 7.5%. BitDeer was down 14%. Bitfarms down 6%. Cypher down 7%. CleanSpark down 12%. Cores down 8%. DigiHost down 11%. DMG 13%. Greenwich down 18%. Hive down 10%. Hut 8 down 11%, almost 12% there. Iris Energy down 14%. Marathon was down 15%. Mawson was down 15%. Riot was down 10%. Soluna down 11%. Stronghold down 16%. And Wolf was down 11%. So pretty bad week for all the miners here. I know a lot of people were thinking that with the spot Bitcoin ETF happening, then we may see what we saw when gold, when that happened, when gold got its Bitcoin gold ETFs. At that point, the price of gold basically went on a rally for like 8 years, right? That's one of the other questions that I had here from some of you guys as well. Is it possible that Bitcoin could follow the trend that we saw with gold ETFs as well for the next 8 years? Time will only tell, right? The only thing that we can really look at is historical cycles in Bitcoin. After the halving cycle, Bitcoin usually peaks within 12 to 18 months after the halving event. So if Bitcoin continues going up beyond that, we might see the same kind of thing as we saw with gold, where it ran up for basically 8 years straight. Now, we may get a little bit longer rally this time around, so we'll have to see probably around the 2024 months after the halving event if we're still going up somewhere around there. I think that might be a little bit of a tell at that point. But until then, it's anybody's guess. Anybody tells you that they know for sure is just guessing, just like anybody else here. So we'll have to see how it goes. We got basically 3 months until the halving event, and then we got another 12 to 18 months where we might get into that bull rally like we have in the previous cycles. And at that point, we'll see what's happening with Bitcoin and the ETFs. Are they doing much better? Is it continuing to go up after the 18 months, going into like 24 months out after the halving event? So stay tuned for that. We'll cover it all when it does happen here. Okay. And now let's get into also some of you guys had questions on Bitcoin last halving cycle. How did that act? How did that play out? So I thought I would do this again. I've done this before in the past, but we obviously have a lot more new members here, subscribers as well. So I thought we would kind of go over this. So this chart over here shows us a year out before the halving event in 2020. All right, so the red line over here on the chart is the halving event that we saw in 2020. At that point, we can see here that we had Hut 8, Hive, Riot, Bitfarms, and Mara basically trading at that point. We've had a lot of miners over the last, 3 years basically get into the mining space as well. We've seen CleanSpark get into it. We've seen TerraWolf, Cypher, BitDeer go public at least. Who else do we have in there? Some of the other ones that got into it, Argo, the list goes on, right? So we've had a lot more miners going into this cycle, which we didn't have that cycle. So, but you're looking at the miners that we did have back then. I think there was also DMG and Digi, but they were on the OTC markets at that point, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I'm going over memory here, and it's going back quite a few years back. Okay, but based on these couple that we do have here, we can see that a year out before the halving event, for the most part, we saw the miners. We had some spikes here a little bit, but overall they were dropping down here going into the halving event, and they finished out right at the halving event being down 44% for Hive. Riot was down 47%, Bitfarms was down 59%, Marathon was down 79%, and Bitcoin was actually up 29%. It was up higher in the beginning here, about roughly, what would that be, about 9 months or so. We had the halving event in May, so about 10 months prior, it was actually still running up, and then after that, it started going back down. So you can see how that has played out. The big challenge with us was this year around, we had the halving event, or not the halving event, but the SPY Bitcoin ETF rumors, and a lot of people were thinking that's going to happen. That kind of threw a monkey wrench into everything that we had in the prior cycle, I think, right? Because if we'll look at that in a second here, but if we look at how the miners did after the halving cycle here on 2020, you can see here that here's the halving event right there, the little red line. You can probably barely see that, but you can see how much the miners have peaked here. We had the halving in May, and then we're looking at basically, what is that, February, March, April, May, pretty much 12 months out is when they kind of peaked here. I would even say even less than that, maybe about 10 months. It looks like somewhere between February and March is when they kind of peaked. So looking at maybe 10 months afterwards. On the previous cycle, this was going into 2021 now, we saw that Marathon here peaked at around, what is that going to be, about 7,000 percentage gains here from the bottom, right around the halving cycle that we had back here. That's how far it ran up. A year out, it was at 2,493% up. Then we had Riot. Riot kind of peaked here at approximately 3,200 or so percent up. And this was right around also March, beginning of March, it looks like somewhere around there. And then it fell down to only being up 924%. Then we have Hive. Hive also kind of peaked right around the same time frame. It was up about 17 to 1,800% at one point. Bitfarms was up around 1,600% at that point as well. And then we had, who else was here? Hut. Hut was a little bit underperformer here. It looks like it was only up 260% at the peak sometime in here, or maybe a little more. I can't really tell. Maybe 500, 600%. We got too many over here that are obstructing. And then we got Bitcoin being up 341% up at one point here towards the end of the cycle, or the 1 year after the halving event. But more or less, what we saw is obviously huge gains for the miners. Bitcoin obviously going up nicely as well, but we saw a lot more leverage play in the Bitcoin miners. And that's kind of what we're expecting here again this cycle, right? The only thing is SPY Bitcoin ETF. How is that going to impact things? We don't know. We'll have to see on that one, okay? So that's kind of how things played out before and after the halving cycle. Now, we can also see that some of the miners also kind of peaked before. We had a double top basically in Bitcoin in 2021. at that point. We had a top on Bitcoin here roughly in, I think it was right around February, April, right around, can't really see it here on this one, but we had a double top in Bitcoin, excuse me, Bitcoin at that time. Let's go back to this chart. We can see it probably better. If we go to Bitcoin here and go back out a year, there we go. So there's that double top that we had, right? So we peaked here in April in 21. We came back down, obviously, because of the FUD that we had with Tesla no longer accepting Bitcoin for their cars. Then we had also the China news stating that they are going to be banning Bitcoin mining in that country. So that obviously drove price down. We bottomed out in July, and then we continued another rally upwards here through the end of the year. And we pretty much topped out on November 10th, it looks like, in 2021. Where at that point we reached 69,000 in Bitcoin at that price level. Okay, so we had a double top. It looks like most of the miners here pretty much peaked right around here. If we look at this chart here, right, you can see it over here. And then most of them came down. The only one that did a double top also was Marathon. Marathon went up to about 7,000 percentage gains from there. The prior peak was only at 6,000. So that one kind of followed Bitcoin a little bit more closely than some of the other miners here, where they were continuing to go down, even though they did go up a little bit here towards that other peak as well. But they were, you can see it on the trend here, they were going downwards nonetheless. Okay, so that's one thing you also take into consideration, is the miners could peak before Bitcoin actually peaks. It's usually not much more than maybe a week or so before, a couple of days before Bitcoin peaks is when they might actually peak as well. Something to keep an eye on. We'll look at some other charts as far as where Bitcoin is getting close to being overbought, we'll look at some metrics on Bitcoin as well once we get closer into that cycle, this next cycle, which we're going to be entering here in a couple months. Okay, so that's how that has played out on that one. And then here's how we are looking this year so far. So we're looking at basically from April of this year going out to the end of this year. And we saw that Bitcoin and the miners actually rallied in the beginning of the year all the way through basically July, where they peaked. At that point, we started going back down in price, which is kind of what I was expecting to happen with Bitcoin miners going into the halving event. The only monkey wrench that was thrown in there was obviously the spot Bitcoin ETF. That threw a big wrench in there where people were obviously front running the spot Bitcoin ETF, rising the price of Bitcoin, which in course obviously rose the price of the Bitcoin miners as well. Right, we can see here how some of these miners were up quite nicely from even that time frame, but they bottomed out they peaked in July, they bottomed out in October roughly, and that's kind of when we started getting more and more news on the spot Bitcoin ETF potentially getting approved, right? So that has rallied up. Now we got the spot Bitcoin ETF. Now it seems like it's one of those events where it's sell the news, and we're seeing a huge drop here in miners, Bitcoin itself, and it's tough to say, but I think this is going to probably continue on until we get to the halving event, and then at that point things might switch back over into a bull run, as we know that right now we're getting 900 Bitcoins per day from the miners, roughly, right, on the rewards. You also have this Bitcoin transaction fees being added in there, a little bit less so far this month, but still pretty good. And then we also will have the halving event that will cut supply down to 450 Bitcoin per day. That's going to be a supply shock going forward, which then obviously should be a supply and demand economic event where you have less supply, more demand. Price at that point should go up, like we've seen in prior cycles as well. Should, right? The keyword is should, but we'll have to see if that happens. The spot Bitcoin ETF might throw a wrench in all of this. We'll have to see how that's going to play out. Okay, but that's kind of what I'm looking at right now. The plan is to dollar cost average in as best as I can. If I have cash, I'm going to do it while prices are possibly going back down lower. And the thesis behind this is because Bitcoin's rally after the halving event is going to be really, really good. So anything that I can dollar cost average into right now that I have positions in is going to do that much better going forward, especially once we get into the all-time highs potential with Bitcoin getting to 100,000, 200,000. Who knows where it's going to go, right? You got Kathy Woods from ARK saying 500,000. I think that might be a little bit too high. We got also Plan B saying the same thing. That might get to about 500,000. We'll see if it can get there. Maybe with the spot Bitcoin ETFs and the demand going there, maybe that will bring us up to that point. I'm guessing between 100 to 200,000 is kind of my estimate on that one. If we go beyond that, all the better, right? But we'll definitely keep an eye on it. So plan is to dollar cost average in, and then just be patient. I look at these dips as buying opportunities. I hope you guys are looking at it the same way. Obviously, if you're trading it or day trading the stuff, well, then that gets a little bit more tricky. Or if you're doing options and things like that, that gets a little bit more risky there. So you got to be careful with these miners because they are leverage play on Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin goes up 2x, they're likely to go up 5x. Bitcoin goes down to 4x. Miners are likely to go down, 5, 6, 7x, if not more. So be careful of that. All right. So that is it there. Hopefully that explains a lot of the stuff here that I have seen over the years, cycles. I've been tracking this stuff. And then if you guys have any more questions on this, let me know down in the comments below. But let's get into some of the charts that we do have here, and we'll call it a day. So the first one we're going to take a look at is obviously how the miners have performed here in the last week compared to Bitcoin. And on this first chart, we look at how the miners have performed in the last 52 weeks from their lows. So from the 52-week lows and from the 52-week highs. We can still see here that core is up tremendously, up 1,523%. Mawson, for no apparent reason, is up 504%. I think people are just basically getting into it, looking at the other miners that have gone up quite nicely, and then seeing that Mawson is market cap is so low, they're so undervalued and everything else, and they're just going into it without actually looking at the fundamentals behind the company. There's probably reasons why they were down so much, and then people just got into it and started running it for no reason. Clean Spark up 300%, Marathon up 270%, Bitfarms up 258%, and then you can see obviously the rest of them. Bitcoin's only up 118%. So far in the last 52 weeks, DigiHost obviously underperformed that by 90%, is at 90%, Hive at 64%, and Hut 8 at 63%. So the two Canadian miners, I think DigiHost is, I'm trying to remember if DigiHost is a Canadian or American miner, I can't remember. But those might be the ones that are, for whatever reason, are not doing that well. Also, Hive and Hut 8 had, in the past, they were mining Ethereum, which was very, very profitable for them. But with the switch to proof of stake on that one, that took out a lot of the profits that they were seeing. And I think that's maybe why they are down to where they are. Hut 8 obviously didn't also grow, didn't grow any at all last year pretty much until they actually merged with USBTC, where they increased their hash rate to 7.2 or 7.3 exahash at that point. But the performance over the last year was just terrible on that one. Okay, but you can see the rest here, and then you can see obviously how far the miners are away from their 52-week highs here, which a lot of these guys reached in the last week or two. And then Bitcoin's still only 12.5% away from its 52-week high, so that's kind of good there. Okay, looking at the weekly performance here on how the miners have done, you can see that Bitcoin is down 2.97%, and this is from Friday to Friday is when I track it. And then we can see Bitfarms was down 10%, all right, on the week, so almost was a 3x worse than what Bitcoin did. TeraWolf down about 12%, Hive down 12%, Core down 14, almost 15, Cypher down 16.5 roughly, Iris almost 17% down, Hut almost the same thing, BitDigital down 18% and a half, and you got DigiHost down 19, Mawson down 19.75, CleanSpark down 20.2, Riot down 20.9, Marathon down 21.3, DMG down 21.35, BitDeer down 24, Sphere down 26, and Argo down 41%. So pretty bad week, right? Leverage play on Bitcoin works both ways, to the upside and to the downside. So you got to take that into consideration, especially if you're getting into, like I said, options or things like that, where you can get wrecked relatively quickly. Good. So that's on the 1 week. On the 4 week, things look a little bit different here, but still mostly to the downside. The only ones that are still up are Core up 7.81%, Mawson 12.5%, and then Bitcoin at this point is down 2.6% from 4 weeks ago. Not a lot of change from the 1 week before. And you can see everybody else here is down quite substantially here. And then if we look at 8 weeks out, looks a lot better, right? Bitcoin's up 13%. We got Mawson up 372%. Like I said, for no real apparent reason there. I think it's just like, the only equivalent I can put to this would be like a GameStop, if you remember that a couple years back. It's basically, Mawson is basically GameStop, is the way I see it. Okay, Core up 202%. That's kind of indicative of them trying to get out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy, so I think that's the reason why that one's running, so that's understandable there. Bitfarms up 128%, Sphere up 141%, and then a lot of guys here under the 100% mark on the 8 weeks. And then from 12 weeks ago, Bitcoin's up 26%. So Mawson's still up 282%. Like I talked about that before. Marathon up 114, Bitfarms up 121, Core up 102%. And what else do we have here? CleanSpark up 96%, and then Sphere up 88%. And you can see obviously the rest of them, but that's kind of the worthy mentions here. So looking at the table here, we can see that we've had pretty much 2 weeks in the red here so far. We had a mixed week 3 weeks ago, which was kind of, I would say, a mix. We have how many days in the green? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Or 8 of the miners in the green, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 miners in the red. So it was more or less a red week at that point. So we've had 3 weeks in the red here so far, and we got obviously the news of the spot Bitcoin ETF last week, and we were in the red 2 weeks. So it looks like we maybe had a clue there that we might be coming down on the spot Bitcoin ETFs when they do get approved. Okay, but we've had plenty of green here in the past as well, along with plenty of red. So we may be just seeing a little bit of a pullback. We may be continuing to go down into the halving event. We'll have to see how that plays out. All right, so that's it on that one. I think that's it for this. Let's take a look at some of the numbers here for the miners over the last 12 months, basically. So on this, we're looking at the 12 months percentage gains in hash rate growth. So we're looking basically going back to January of 2022, and we're kind of going back, or this would be 12 months. So we're going back to December of 2023 to December of, oh, sorry, wow. From December of 2022 to December of 2023. Okay, got that straightened out. So based on this, we can see Iris here is up the most as percentage gains, but they were also a smaller miner. So any increases that they saw, so let me put it to you this way. If somebody's like 1.5 or 2 exahash, they grow to 6 exahash, that's that's basically 20% or whatever you want to say. Somebody that's larger at like 7 exahash, they have to get to basically 21 exahash to have a 2x or 3x on that one, okay? So that also has to be taken into consideration there. So Iris obviously has done the best here, followed by probably Marathon, I think. If not Sphere. Sphere was at like 100 petahash. They got to, or they were maybe a little bit more than that. I can't remember now, but I think they were at 100 petahash. And they obviously increased that quite nicely here. I think maybe they were a little bit higher. We'd have to take a look at it. But Stronghold is down towards the bottom here. TeraWolf up 244%. Hut up 187%. And HUD is up 187% only because they merged with USBTC, which got them to 7.2, 7.3 exahash. Cypher obviously had a nice increase there as well. Who else? BitDigital, BitDeer, CleanSpark, DigiHost, Hive. Pretty good increases there over the last 12 months. Then when we look at the 12-month hash rate difference, so how much hash rate did they actually increase? And you can see here that Marathon, 17.6 exahash increase in the last 12 months. Huge increase, right? They had a bunch of miners that they were supposed to get plugged in. But after, well, they had a bunch of delays in 2023, not 2023, 2022. They were supposed to get to like 23 exahash that year that they were planning on. Miners were getting installed and everything else, but they just couldn't get the facilities energized, and it was being delayed and delayed and delayed. And finally, everything came together for them in 2023, where they did a fantastic job getting everything plugged in. So that's why we're seeing that huge growth in them. BitDeer also 6.7, but that's basically because they just came public this year. That's why they're up there. Bitfarms 2 exahash, Cypher up 4.3, CleanSpark up 3.8. Who else? Hut 8, like I said, getting merger with USBTC, got them up there to 4.6. Iris 4.2, Riot 2.7, and then TeraWolf 3.5 on that. So those are all looking pretty good there. Lifetime hash rate growth. So this is going back to January of 2022 when I started tracking. So that's kind of my lifetime track. Your percentage growth, you can see here that Sphere is up 1,200%, and that's only because they were at like 100 petahash. They got to 1.2 exahash. All right, so that's the only reason there. Then you got Iris at 608%, Marathon at 610% growth since then. So a huge growth from those guys. Then we got BitDigital 451%, CleanSpark 390%. Who else do we have here that's kind of high up there? Cypher 232, Hut 8 236, Riot 258, and TeraWolf 286. So those all look pretty good. And then year over year BTC mined. So what did they mine last December compared to what they mined this December? And we can see here that Marathon, obviously a huge increase from there. Obviously they grew the hash rate tremendously, 17 exahash, something like that. So they added another 1.3 thousand Bitcoin compared to last year, which was great. And we got BitDeer up 434, and that's only because they became public this year or last year. Okay, on that side of things, Bitfarms surprisingly was actually down 50 BTC on that one. They've been growing, but I guess not growing fast enough to compensate for the network hash rate increase. So we're seeing that as a result. Cypher was up 240%, CleanSpark 256, Hut 8 was up 292% in December, and that's basically because they have USBTC miners in there as well, where they didn't have those before last year. Core was down 258, and that was kind of to be expected because their hash rate kind of peaked at 17 exahash sometime in February of last year, I think. And then their hash rate was actually going down. I'm not sure if they were just turning off miners or selling those, but miners are starting to get back plugged in. So they're down quite a bit there. Who else was interesting? 207%, 207 Bitcoin on Stronghold. Stronghold also didn't start providing their numbers again until sometime this year, around April or May, I think. We have to look at it when they actually start providing that. Prior to that, they stopped providing it. They were providing it in 2022. To a certain point where, you know, a lot of miners got in trouble financially, and then they stopped providing it, and then they started back up. So that's kind of why that is that way. Otherwise, it might be actually down for them. TeraWolf 209, which is good there as well. And that includes also their joint venture, I believe, for them. So it might be actually less if we look at just their self-mining there. And that's about it. So you can see the list here, how that shapes up. 12 months average BTC per exahash efficiency. So we're taking the average hash rate over the last 12 months, dividing by the average amount of BTC generated per month. And we're getting an average BTC per exahash efficiency. Top one came in at here, looks like Cypher at 90.64, followed by Hive at 88.25. Then we got Iris at 86.85. Then we got, who else would be there? Probably CleanSpark at 82.48, BitDigital at 82. So those are kind of the more efficient miners. And the reason we want to look at that is because if the miners are operating at 99% uptime or 100% uptime, we ideally want to see 100% uptime, but let's just say 99.9 something percent uptime. That means that the miners that they purchased will get paid off faster than somebody that's operating at 80% or 90%, because you have more days where those miners are running and they'll get paid off faster. That's why we look at BTC per exahash efficiency. Excuse me. Okay. And that is basically it here on this. So you guys can see all of this, how that has stacked up. And I like to look at these metrics here just to see how they're growing year over year, or in general growing, since we started tracking them. And I think it's kind of nice to take a look at that as well. Other than that, we'll see what else happens later on. We'll see what other metrics we can take a look at here going forward. We'll do some other metrics as well. We'll look at maybe tomorrow, we'll take a look at see where the miners are right now. Are they still undervalued or overvalued based on my numbers here? And we'll look at that, okay? Other than that, the only thing that I want to say here is coming up this week on Wednesday at 5 p.m. Central Time, I'm going to be joining the Bitcoin mining stock guy. You can call him BMG or Guy. That'll be at 5 o'clock. We're going to do a Twitter Spaces on that. That should be fun. Join us for that. If you guys have any questions in there, we'll try and get stuff answered. We'll try to keep it at about an hour, because then I have to go in and record a video for you guys anyways. So we'll try to keep it like an hour, hour and a half. I think at that point, that'll be a good conversation there. And we'll see who else we want to get in there to join us for the hosts, for the speakers, I guess. Okay, so that's it for that. Going back to here, spreadsheets are always available to my Patreon members, so you get access to those. Link is down in the description. That's still $8 a month. We have also the access to all the members there to our private Discord channel as well, where we talk about all of this stuff here. I probably should pull it up for you guys one of these days and show you guys all the conversations that are going in there. But I'll have to get permission, obviously, from maybe the members there. If they want their names out there, I'll have to figure out a way to hide their names. Okay, but that's it. So hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. We'll see what we can come up with tomorrow on any other data or things like that. Like I said, we'll take a look at undervalued, overvalued maybe right now. And hopefully this all helps and makes sense for you guys. This is very volatile space with the miners being a leverage play on Bitcoin, right? So be careful there. Look at it to the long-term view of it. We're still out 3 months before the halving event. We got a ways to go after the halving event until we reach possibly new all-time highs. And we'll see what impact the spot Bitcoin ETF has on that as well. So dollar cost average in, not financial advice. Be careful out there and just look at the long picture, not the short time frame. Okay, that's it. So thank you so much for coming in. As always, thank you to the Patreon members, to the YouTube members as well. And I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you guys probably tomorrow, and then we'll see where things go from there. All right.